Bomberman 1 and 2, the original NES soundtracks on a single LP published by Ship to Shore Phone Co.
Alright, what's going on, Guy Nation? I'm your host, FG, and welcome back to another vinyl hands-on session. Today we have not just one, but two retro-flavored soundtracks here on vinyl. Bomberman, the first game, and the second game released on the NES. So, is this a blast from the past, or is it more like the debris that leaves after? Let's discuss Bomberman 1 and 2.
Bomberman, developed by the late Hudson Soft and released in 1987 for the NES. This is an overhead action game which has you take control of the titular character across 50 levels of blocks and enemies. In hopes to reach the surface to become human, Bomberman uses his signature weapon to clear the path, take out the bad guys, and discover power-ups to get stronger along the way. While this would be her first exposure to Bomberman, the character is actually reused from Hudson Soft's other game, Load Runner, and the core gameplay being retooled for the hardware, with the original Bomberman made for PCs such as the MSX, which were only released in Japan. With some releases between, the official follow-up, Bomberman 2, released in 1993 here in the West. It follows the same core gameplay while continuing to build off what made them great, give or take the limitations of the NES. Even if the plot leans on the zany side, with his rival Black Bomber framing White Bomber into robbing a bank, he now goes on a quest to escape prison and clear his name. The graphics were severely overhauled for the NES hardware, gameplay was better paced with some tweaks to the game balance, there was a lot more variety to the visuals, and today's subject, the music, being far greater in number and length, and technically impressive for the hardware.
The early success of these Bomberman games, not just these two specifically, but also some that were released in between, would pave the way to establishing the Bomberman series that was best known by Hudson Soft in the 90s and early 2000s. Bomberman was on almost every console released, sometimes even more than once. It was one of those series where many knew it, and would always, for the most part, get better with each release than after. Later on, especially in the late 2000s, I remember especially the Xbox 360 and the WiiWare service having their own online multiplayer versions of Bomberman's battle mode. But the case in point here with these first two games is that even with some of the later entries, it's clear that they haven't aged entirely well. And I feel like this is especially true for the first Bomberman, where it just feels way too repetitive early on, and the unbalanced difficulty in the first couple of rounds until you get some of the first upgrades doesn't really make for a fun experience. But that's to say that these games do still have their own charm and uniqueness to them. Bomberman, which simply was just based on changing a character from another property, and Bomberman 2, which not only upped the ante, but definitely improved on the hardware capabilities of the system. Both these games are just as significant to the series as they are relatively fun to play with even still. Do they have their issues? Yes, but it wouldn't be Bomberman without them. So, that said, let's transition to the soundtracks of these games.
Bomberman's soundtrack is very basic, consisting of a couple short themes that only last a few seconds and loop non-stop. It can best be compared to very early arcade games, where unfortunately it can become very repetitive the longer you play. By the time other games were releasing, especially for the US where this game came out 2 years after it released, this did very little to set the game apart from others. There just isn't enough to it. Bomberman 2's soundtrack is night and day with the original game. Not only are tracks longer, but they're much more diverse and have plenty of depth to them. Whereas the original only had a single stage theme, this sequel has 3, each completely different from the one before. These two games were composed by Jun Chikuma, who would continue to create music for the Bomberman series throughout the 90s. She would be responsible for the primary theme associated with the series, which debuted in the original game and was later remixed in subsequent games, including Bomberman 2. This single LP on a black record has a total of 29 tracks. To break them down, we got 7 tracks and 4 sound effects from Bomberman, and 10 tracks and 8 sound effects from Bomberman 2. Top it off with some original artwork and a special trick with this release, and there may just be a saving grace to this one.
Longtime viewers of my channel know that I love myself a chiptune soundtrack as well as soundtracks from the NES. After all, the last video we looked at was River City Ransom. But when it comes to Bomberman, the first Bomberman more specifically, I don't think it's that strong of a soundtrack. It's just simply way too short and loops too much. you're hearing the same thing over and over again. There's just not enough variety to it. And when it comes to this vinyl pressing, the minute you put it onto the turntable, you can listen to the entire soundtrack in less than 3 minutes. And then you're finding yourself walking right back to it because it's got a lockout groove on both sides, as a matter of fact, of a looping explosion sound effect. So I really don't think that the original Bomberman soundtrack is that strong. Iconic? I mean, yeah, sure. But to listen again and again, I don't think this is it. And I think Ship to Shore knew this as well, because this is why we have 2 soundtracks included. And so to make up for that, I can safely say that Bomberman 2 is definitely the reason to get this one. I'm willing to say that it's even underrated. The thing is though, I have to mention that many of the tracks are actually variants that were used in a port before this one. Well, I wouldn't call it a port, more like an original game, but that was Bomberman for the TurboGrafx 16. If you listen to both versions of the tracks simultaneously, you'll hear that they have the same melody, but because of the hardware, they sound very different. And I feel like it's different enough that this one still stands out on its own. I don't know which I would choose as my favorite version, but I really do love it here on the 8-bit hardware. And I think it sounds great, especially compared to the original Bomberman. So, the original Bomberman soundtrack? But Bomberman 2? Yeah, that's my recommendation. So that's the soundtracks. The only thing now is to look at the presentation.
The outer sleeve artwork is an original piece by Matty Kopp, with Bomberman front and center in a dynamic action shot. Meanwhile, the back artwork showcases some of the game's power-ups and the full track listing and credits. No inner sleeve artwork for this one, though.
I love the style that Matty went for when it came to this art piece, and I'm sure many fans will especially love this. The use of the line details and the colors definitely make this piece pop. And I'm certain that this is one that will definitely catch your eyes when you look at it in the collection. It's certainly one of the strong points of this LP release. I love the front artwork. It definitely screams Bomberman, down to the very explosion in the background. And the backside's got all the items that are used in the game. Speed up, fire up, you got the remote control. I love it. I really love the presentation that they went here with this LP, the outer sleeve. Unfortunately though, we don't have any inner sleeve artwork. It's just the regular paperback lining that they went with. But hey, it's definitely one of the better ones out there. Better than paper anyways.
The single black vinyl features a Zoetrope design on the A side, while the B side has a basic label with the track listing. Let's talk a little more about this one in detail.
This LP makes use of what is known as a Zoetrope. And the way a Zoetrope works is that by utilizing motion and several images in motion, it gives the illusion that the image itself is moving. But in order to pull this off, it actually makes use of a strobe light, flashing each time the images change and getting rid of the blur in between. So when you see it in motion and it does work, it's pretty cool. You actually see Bomberman from the original moving as he does in the game, as well as the bomb as well. Unfortunately though, during my testing, I couldn't get it to really work as well as they had demonstrated. And I think on my part, that's because of the strobe lighting. I just don't have the right equipment on me. I'm sure if I spent a little time looking, I could probably find something, but I don't think it should be that much of a hassle to get something to work. That's just personal opinion, but just to make it clear. Overall though, I really do like that they did something unique for the A side just because of how short the original Bomberman is. And the B side is just the full Bomberman 2 soundtrack. It's got the regular album label on it. So yeah, overall, I'm pretty impressed when it comes to the presentation of this pressing. And it's certainly one of the bigger reasons to get this LP. But now the big one, how's it sound? Well, thankfully, I think it sounds great with little to no pops and crackles, just as expected from Ship to Shore. So, how do you think it sounds? Let's take a listen to some samples from Bomberman 1 and 2. As a fan of the Bomberman series, as well as a lover of all things chiptune and NES styled, I gotta say, this one I'm especially mixed on. One half of the soundtrack isn't as good as it should be, and the other half I still think is still underrated. Overall though, it's the presentation that really lifts this one up. But if you're a diehard fan of the Bomberman series, I can't help but think that there's certainly better ones out there that deserve to be pressed to vinyl. So this is one that I can't say really gets my recommendation out there. Unless you really love the artwork or you're a diehard fan of the Bomberman series, I think this is one that's easy to skip out on. But that's gonna do it for this hands-on session of Bomberman 1 and 2 on vinyl. My favorite tracks this session has to be the special theme from the original Bomberman. I just love how pepped up it gets, even though it's kind of hard to find the item in the game. And my favorite from Bomberman 2 has to be that first theme. I love the arrangement that they did that's based on the original Bomberman, but then you have the extra instrumentation that follows. So, that in mind, thanks so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next video. Oh? Ah!